Hello, we're now resuming with part 2 of our series of mini lectures for legal issues and medication administration. So we'll begin by looking at who may administer medications. It's important that hospitals ensure that employees who are administering medications or poisons have appropriate qualifications and training. And the health department considers the following classes of people competent to do so. So they're medical practitioners, dentists, nurse practitioners, midwife practitioners, RNs, registered midwives, pharmacists, and endorsed enrolled nurses. We always get a lot of questions in relation to the role of endorsed enrolled nurses, so I thought it useful just to bring up the fact sheet, which is relevant for those endorsed enrolled nurses, particularly working in New South Wales hospitals. So I'm just going to bring my screen along, so bear with me. Remembering the importance if you've ever got to find information. So where am I at the moment? Well, I'm on the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Australia, and of course, again, very useful information, and there's some fact sheets that we're going to look at. And because we're looking at the area of medication administration and enrolled nurses, which always generates some discussions, let's have a look at what the fact sheet has to say about that role. So the NMBA again just highlights the what their role is, and they're imparting the national law, if you like. So enrolled nurses are able to administer meds if they have completed medication administration education at some stage in their career. So they can. Who can, if they don't have a notation on their registration? This means they've successfully completed EN medication administration education. This education may have been completed before or after the intro of the National Registration and Accreditation Scheme. ENs who cannot have the notation does not hold board-approved qualification. So essentially, you've got to have done some further study. Can all ENs, it's in relation to IV administration. No, ENs with a notation cannot administer medicines, including intravenous medicines. ENs without a notification can only administer IV meds if they have completed intravenous medication education. So it's clearly there. So, and what are the legislation? Well, it's your state and territory poisons legislation. Now, in New South Wales, ENs who do not have a notification, they've done further study for giving out IVs and or medications, but they can't give out S8s. The difference for Div 2s in Victoria, they are able to do so. So that's just one difference that I always say, particularly in, if you're travelling from state to territory, regardless if you're an enrolled nurse or you're a registered nurse, particularly in the area of drug administration, always check that state or territory's legislation, which again will be articulated for you in the policy document of the institution that you're working at. Part of your responsibilities in this area is to be very clear of the rules and regulations in terms of storage of drugs. So just as much as you have to be very familiar with how to administer drugs correctly, part of your role in terms of your accountability and adhering to the standards in this area is that you must know how inpatient care areas drugs are stored. So again, this information is all highlighted in the New South Wales medication handling policy, but again, I've just summarised it for you essentially. The term patient care areas refers to all areas in a hospital where patient treatment may be carried out and includes wards, occupational therapy, day surgery and other treatment areas. And the nurse in charge of that area is responsible for the storage of all drugs in the ward. He or she must ensure that the drugs are stored in accordance with the legal requirements and correct conditions are met in relation to security, temperature and stock rotation, expiry dates and so forth. So Yes, the nurse in charge responsible. You must know that all general S4s stored out of patient public access in a locked cupboard or in a locked room or locked medication trolley. It must always be kept locked in use. Keys must be kept on the person of a nurse in charge or delegate. Drug cupboard keys must be kept separate from other ward keys. So it's very important that you are familiar with that. Regulation of drug administration or the ward register. The nurse in charge is responsible recording kept of all S8s, S4Ds and drugs in ward registers. It's a bound book with consecutively numbered pages. Drugs recorded are S8s, however they may include other drugs, for example those S4D drugs that, usually those drugs that have been deemed a high risk or there have been a lot of problems with them, things like benzodiazepines, ketamine, those sorts of drugs. So it is very, very important that, particularly as you're learning and going through your 3 years, but particularly when you're registered, you're very, very familiar. And again, it's all highlighted in your policy document. So again, I stress the importance of really knowing the ins and outs of that policy document. This is where all this sort of information is kept. So just looking at entries in the ward register, some key points. There's a separate page for each drug, date, time of day, patient's name. There's rules in relation to how it's discarded, how it's recorded, amount destroyed, the balance, the name of prescriber, and how to handle mistakes, for example. A big important part is that, in terms of all entries must be countersigned by a witness who's eligible to do so, who's present during the entire transaction, and there must be full signatures, have the name of the prescriber. The witness must be present during the entire transaction. For example, the removal of a drug, the recording in the register, transfer to the patient, administration to patient transfer, and discarding of unused drug or poison. The mistakes, if you make a mistake in the drug register, it must be left as is, marked with an asterisk, entry rewritten as appropriate, and a note explaining error must be made in the margin, initialed and dated. Balance checks, in charge where possible at change of shifts. If there's a loss of drugs, what if drugs go missing? Nurse in charge must immediately report loss or theft to the hospital director of pharmacy or director of nursing or director of medical services, because again, it could be a very, very, very serious matter. So just to really impress on you, you must know this. Very good exam questions, for example, the storage and handling of drugs, you need to know of this, because so you're learning how to do it practically in your clinical subjects, you need to know the legislative boundaries that surround that practice.